Greetings and welcome to our latest installment of Lunch and Learn, where we take and dive into any one of our National Alliance for Direct Support Professionals competencies, and we try to help you understand and I hopefully use the competencies to their fullest. My name is John Raphael. I'm here with Dan Hermrich.
Hi, everybody.
Hello. And we are going to have some lunch and learn with you. That said, here we go. This is us. That's Dan on the left and me on the right. Dan, introduce yourself there.
Yeah, I'm Dan Hermrich. I'm the Director of Certification and Accreditation here at NADSP. I run our wonderful new eBadge Academy and get to hang out with John from time to time and talk competencies.
Yeah, and that's me. I'm John, and I'm the Director of Educational Services here. So this is exciting for us because what we are able to do with these Lunch and Learns is feature not only our competencies, but also talk about our electronic badges, which you're going to hear more and more about, and we're going to talk about them certainly today. Our mission is pretty straight ahead. Our vision, we're all about spreading the knowledge, the skills, and the values of the profession of direct support through anything and everything that we do as an organization. We want the best for people who receive supports from direct support professionals, and we want the best for direct support professionals. So that said, that's our vision and mission. And if you're not familiar with it, there it is. And if you are familiar with it, we can't look at it enough, and that's what we're all about. Dan, this is the Venn diagram.
This is our Venn diagram. And this is something, if you've heard any presentation from NADSP, you've heard about the Venn diagram. We believe that in order to provide quality support at the point of interaction, that a DSP needs three basic things. They need knowledge, skills, and values. And John, I think during a crisis, that's when you can really see how important all of these things are.
Yeah.
I mean, knowledge, you've got to have some knowledge, not only about how to deal with crisis in general that you might have gotten from a training program, but you got to have some knowledge of that person and then what is stressful for them and what might be driving this crisis in their life. Skills, skills are your ability to put that knowledge into practice. And I think, in a crisis, it's one thing to be able to, to go to a training and take a multiple choice test about how to handle a crisis. It's a completely different story when you're actually in that crisis.
Yep.
And maybe, it's not just stressful for that person you're supporting, but it's a stressful moment for you as well. To still be able to draw on that knowledge and put it into practice in a real, live, stressful situation is huge. And values, there are many different ways that someone might respond to a crisis, and not all of them would be in line with our NADSP Code of Ethics. So to be grounded in that Code of Ethics, to have that roadmap to guide you in interactions that you may have never anticipated, you may have never trained for this unique situation you suddenly find yourself in. But that Code of Ethics can be a roadmap and guide you and let you know what is okay and what's not okay in your direct support relationship.
Yeah, I mean, that's so well said, Dan. And I think looking at the middle of that Venn diagram, there it is again, that word. We hear it a lot, we use it a lot, and we should. We want, even in crisis situations, those crisis situations should be done in a quality, supportive way. Here it is. We define quality at the point of interaction between the staff member and the person or the individual with a disability. And in any given crisis situation, that point of interaction is hot. It's intense. It's critical. And that's why a crisis is called a crisis. A crisis, there's a definition for that. And that definition tends to be something that is immediately possibly dangerous and could lead to good outcomes or bad outcomes. And oftentimes we think of crisis and we think that bad outcomes have to happen. But at that point of interaction, as we're going to see, using the competencies and using the Code of Ethics, a direct support professional can have a point of interaction in a crisis situation and do it in a good way. There they are. There's our all of our competencies. And as you can see, area 10, we've bolded it and put it in italics. That's what we're going to talk about today: crisis prevention and intervention. That's interesting. There's two things there: prevention and intervention. You know, I'm of the mind prevention. What is it? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Yeah.
When you get to the point where you have to intervene, the ship has sailed, and you probably didn't prevent. And that's okay, but I think we want to focus on how can we prevent more than intervene, right?
Right. And I think each and every time it gets to that point where you have to intervene, it's a learning experience, right? You're learning, oh, well, that didn't go well. Let's try something different next time. And that can make you better at preventing that crisis in the future.
Absolutely. So here it is. And this is it in its full, its statement, what the competency statement, what the definition is. And crisis prevention and intervention: the direct support professional should be knowledgeable about crisis prevention, intervention, and resolution techniques, and should match such techniques to particular circumstances and individuals. And I'm thinking obviously one of our ethics is person-centered supports. That's also one of our competencies, to be person-centered. And I think when we're talking about individual crisis situations with the individuals we support, we have to make sure that the interventions and the way we approach these situations are all about how we know that particular individual, what will help them through this in the best way possible for them, not a cookie cutter approach to crisis, because that doesn't exist.
Right. So I think one way to look at this is in terms of being knowledgeable about all these different techniques. You could think of that as sort of being your DSP toolbox, right? Your crisis toolbox. There's going to be techniques that you maybe pick up in a training. There's going to be techniques you pick up from coworkers. There's going to be techniques that you just sort of develop over time through getting to know people, and maybe sort of a trial and error process. You got to have that toolbox full of tools, but you also have to be able to pull out the right tool in the right situation, the right tool for the right job. Mm-hmm. Because every, person-centeredness, every person is different, every situation is different. And as John says, it won't be a cookie cutter approach. Mm-hmm. The technique you use with Fred may not be the technique you use with Dwight. Just because they're different people with different personalities, different histories. And you've got to have that awareness that what works with one person may not work with another. What works in the morning, when people maybe, a little tired, a little not quite, haven't had their first cup of coffee yet. I mean, how you address them at that moment in time may be different than how you address them, in the afternoon or in the evening.
Yeah. I think most direct support professionals, pretty much every state in the United States, and certainly throughout Canada, there's often state requirements for crisis intervention training. And there's a bunch of different curricula out there, and each state, some states have their own that they've made up, and that's great. Oftentimes, though, those are general training programs, and that's great. But and I've seen a lot of them, and most of them, one of the main things they try to convey is that you've probably heard this, know the individual, know the person you're supporting, know them. And what does that mean? Well, that means all the stuff we just talked about. Fred and Dwight, maybe Fred's a night owl, and maybe that's the best time to communicate with Fred is at nighttime. And maybe Dwight, you don't really want to talk to him unless he's had, his lunch. You see where this is going? I think direct support professionals, when they look at certainly prevention, they must first start with understanding the person that they're supporting. And that's the beginning of any kind of prevention, in our opinion, in my opinion.
Let's talk real quick about that badge.
Oh yeah, let's do that. That's
So in our eBadge Academy, we have badges that are tied to the CMS core competencies, which are very similar to the NADSP competencies. And we have crisis prevention intervention badges. One of them is crisis intervention, which is about an example of a DSP's work in which they did have to intervene in a crisis. The crisis did happen, and an intervention was necessary. And so we, in our eBadge Academy, we ask DSPs to provide examples of their work, describe examples of their work that meet the badge requirements, and then we review those. So certainly, sometimes the crisis is going to happen, and the DSP needs to be skillful in how they intervene.
Right. So let's move on here. This is the same badge at the top of this page that Dan just described, but what you see, the words there, and I'll read them if you can't see. This is one of the statements that supports the competency, and this is interesting. The competent direct support professional identifies the crisis. Interesting. Identifies the crisis, diffuses the situation, evaluates and determines an intervention strategy, and then contacts necessary supports. There's a lot to that. And so if we unpack that statement right there, first and foremost, you got to know what a crisis is. I think for some situations, for the person that might not know the person you know, they might see that person as being maybe loud or seemingly getting out of control or approaching some kind of volume level where you know the person and that's not a crisis. It's kind of, that's the way they are.
That's the baseline.
Yeah, that's it, man. That's the way they are before dinner. You know, they're a little loud. They might slam a door, whatever that might be. And that's not a crisis. That's the person, and that's okay. That's who the person is. Now, that said, sometimes there's crises that occur that come out of nowhere. And by the way, it doesn't have to just be a crisis from a person or a crisis that is based on a person's behavior or something. A crisis can be a natural event, a snowstorm, a power outage. Equipment failure, the dishwasher breaks, you run out of propane for the stove in the group home. There's all kinds of things that can happen that aren't just centered on a human being, that are just occurrences that can spark all kinds of pretty intense stuff. Now, that said, I think when most direct support professionals think of crisis, they're thinking of, oh, well, I got to get in between, Dwight and Fred because they're fighting. I mean, that certainly could be a crisis, but there's so much more to it than that. And I think one of the things we want you to know is that the competent direct support professional understands that a crisis is something that there's many, many definitions of it depending on where that direct support professional is doing their practice. Now, diffusing a situation, once again, that you got to know the people you support. You've got to know your environment. You got to know what resources are available to you. Is there maybe in the event of a snowstorm is coming, if you live in the northern part of the country, and snowstorm's coming, and maybe you have limited vehicles, and maybe you support a bunch of people in a I don't know, whatever, some kind of residential setting. You know what? You're going to diffuse a crisis by if people have to go to another location for safety because a terrible blizzard is going to hit. Diffusing a situation might be very proactive. It might be something that happens well before a crisis even begins to occur. And that's a good direct support professional that can diffuse a situation. And that's prevention. And that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah. It might be you're going grocery shopping, right? You're stocking up on food before the blizzard. You're making sure that you've got some videos to watch, some board games to play.
Yep. I
mean, that could be crisis prevention right there.
Sure could. You know what? I'm thinking of this. I'm thinking supporting people. A lot of you that are listening to this, I'm sure, and maybe some of you that are listening to this are on the autism spectrum. Sometimes when you're in a support situation with a person that maybe they're on a part of the spectrum where if a routine is ever affected or changed, that it can really ill affect somebody's day, and maybe somebody needs to watch a certain program or listen to a certain song at any given time of the day. You know what? You better make sure that that song is playing that time of day, or that program is on and that person's watching it, because it seems like a little thing, but those are the little things that good direct support professionals and competent direct support professionals can help people have really good days, and not see that song. Oh, that's a silly song, and you know what, we don't have to hear that song today. Well, you know what, no, that's probably not the best way to prevent a crisis, because maybe if that person wants to hear whatever that song is at 8 a.m., you really have an obligation to make sure that song is available to them. It says there, contacts necessary supports. That's interesting. I think that all depends on where you're working, what kind of setting you're working in. If you're working in a family setting, you might have a protocol in place where if there's some kind of identified behavior that needs to be kind of tracked or monitored, which that's part of a direct support professional's role at times. You might have to contact a parent or a guardian, and that might be written in a plan. Or maybe you're working in a residential agency, and sometimes there are behavior specialists and clinicians that could be part of the team that supports people that are experiencing really dynamic situations in their lives and maybe having a crisis point in their life. And you have an obligation to make sure you're contacting anybody and everybody that's necessary to support that person. So let's move on here. This is interesting. Oops, sorry, backwards. I love this. This is documentation. Dan can talk about the badge. So you see crisis documentation. Let me just read the competency statement, and then Dan can talk about the badge. But it's very interesting. This is very important. The competent direct support professional continues to monitor crisis situations, discussing the incident with authorized staff and the person that's in the crisis. And the word here is used as participant, but that means the person that you're supporting. And that direct support professional that's really competent is going to adjust supports and the environment. And they're going to obviously comply with the regulations for reporting any kind of critical incident. So I don't want to talk about documentation there, Dan.
Yeah, well, before we get to the badge, I think that idea of discussing the incident with the participant, with the person you support, is huge. Now, the time to do that is not during the crisis, right? The time to do that is when things have cooled down, when stability has been achieved, to have a conversation about, listen, I know you had a rough time this morning. What can we do to help with that? Is there some adjustment we could make? Are there things that work for you? A lot of people know what works for them, right? And they may say that, when I get like that, it would really help if the room could be quieter, or you could take me to a quiet place. They might be able to tell you, that what really works for me is to, listen to this song. It helps me to feel safe and to calm down and relax. That's wonderful. If you can get that kind of information from the person and follow that guidance, you're in great shape. In other cases, people can't explain that to us, what would work for them, what would help for them, and we sort of have to figure it out kind of through observation and assessment. The badge, though, crisis documentation badge, a lot of times we are in this position where we're trying to understand what's driving a particular behavior. And it's often not obvious to us in that moment, right? In that moment when the crisis is happening, the people we support may not be thinking clearly because it's a stressful situation, and honestly, we may not be thinking all that clearly because it's a stressful situation. But if you can put together the documentation, and if there's a way to look back at the documentation, sometimes in hindsight, things will become clearer. And you'll realize that, this situation only happens when John skips breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
Or you'll realize this is happening when a certain person is supporting John.
Mm-hmm.
You'll be able to piece it together through the documentation, and that will sort of guide you in terms of what your prevention strategy can be, and how to best approach the situation.
Yeah, very well said. Aha. This comes directly from our code of ethics, and we thought that we would be remiss if we didn't put this kind of in today's Lunch and Learn. We need to, as direct support professionals, when we're promoting people's physical and emotional well-being, we need to address challenging behaviors proactively and respectfully. If aversive or deprivation intervention techniques are included in an approved support plan, which they exist, they're out there, I will work diligently to find alternatives, and I'll advocate for the eventual elimination of these techniques from the person's plan. This is directly from our code of ethics. When you look at the work that's been done and the things that have been done in the name of supporting people with disabilities, some of those things have been pretty bad. Aversive conditioning is one of them. And at this point, there are plenty of states that have outlawed aversives and aversive conditioning, but it still exists. And aversives are basically punishing methods for bad behavior. And at one point, this was thought to be a way to change people's behavior to the better. Research does not prove that. Deprivation, taking things away from people or eliminating things from people's lives as some kind of way to change their behavior, in our opinion, and certainly in terms of our code of ethics, unacceptable. But if for some reason those kind of situations you do see as a direct support professional, you have an obligation to and talk about eliminating a crisis. What you're doing here is going even beyond that, but you're preventing physical harm and emotional harm, perhaps. Anything else, Dan?
I think you mentioned that a lot of states require some sort of crisis intervention training.
Mm-hmm.
Some states, design their own. Many of those curricula will sort of the last chapter of the book will be something in terms of how to perform a physical restraint, how to keep people safe, if there's a physical altercation. And that's fine. That can be a tool in your toolbox, but we hope that it's a tool that you're not reaching for very often.
Yep.
We hope that you found other ways to work around those situations, to prevent those situations from occurring in the first place. That's what the Code of Ethics is asking of us, is to be proactive, to be respectful, and boy, that can go a long way, right? I mean, if you've developed a really healthy, respectful relationship with the person you support, that's going to help you in those moments of crisis. That they know you and they trust you. That you haven't been dishonest with them. That you haven't, gotten angry with them for no reason.
Yeah.
That's huge in a crisis, that relationship you've built over time.
Yeah.
So anytime, even if it's approved, even if it's authorized, if you can find an alternative, that's so much better.
Yeah, really is. So this is the first time on any NADSP webinar that we have hosted where we have featured a language so different, and this is Chinese. Those are those characters that you can see. If you can't see them, there's 4 Chinese characters, and each one is a simplified version of a derivation of Chinese, and that's the first 2, and then the second 2 are the same. It's the same word, same word, which the word is comprised of two characters. Uh, and again, I've got this in a pretty reliable source from our internet, but if you do speak Chinese or can read Chinese and that's incorrect, please let us know. I do believe it's pretty accurate, though. But here's the point of this. In the Chinese language, the word crisis, right? The word crisis, it's composed of these two characters. And the one character in the language represents danger, and the other character represents opportunity. And those two words together comprise the word crisis. And I think when we look at it, Dan kind of we alluded to it, and our last slide is going to talk about this. But when we reflect on situations where some bad stuff goes down, where we have responded in some kind of way that we had to respond, whether it's a good positive intervention or sometimes interventions aren't. Sometimes they go bad. And that's okay. Sometimes even people can get hurt, and that's not okay, but that can happen. Bottom line is this: we like to see, and we should see, any kind of crisis as something we can learn from, something we can get better at the next time, whatever it is. And I think that said, it leads us to another. I think one of the most important badges we have in our whole series of e-badges is this: self-reflection. Dan.
Yeah, sometimes we look at the information that's presented to us, and the realization we may have is that we may be the one driving the crisis. We might be engaging in some sort of behavior, some sort of human behavior that is an antecedent behavior for this person we support. That we may not even be aware of it sometimes, but if maybe our voice takes on a certain tone when we talk about something, that can be a trigger, that can be a stimulus, an antecedent for the person we support, and that can be something that in some cases moves them into a crisis. Just little things we may be doing, maybe with the best of intentions, that are causing stress and perhaps triggering a crisis. Sometimes it might be, you might support a person who uses a wheelchair, and you might feel like, well, it's more efficient, it's easier, it's if I grab a hold of that chair and get them where they're going more quickly. That might be something that the person that you're supporting does not want you to do. And maybe the way they're letting you know that they're unhappy with that is a behavior that is seen as them going into crisis. So sometimes a big part of our direct support role is that act of reflecting and determining that, that it's not the person I'm supporting's behavior that I need to work on managing. It's my own behavior I need to work on managing.
And I think with that, I think we hopefully have given you some ideas, certainly some information today about the importance of obviously preventing crisis in the first place, but if crisis should ensue, best ways to intervene. But ultimately, we must learn. We must learn from those situations that are the more trying and more difficult, and some of the hardest situations when doing direct support, when practicing direct support. Sometimes those situations, as horrible as they can be, we can not only learn so much about the people that we support and how we can do it better with them, but we can learn a lot about ourselves. And that's why I think this electronic badge is one that I hope any of you that are enrolled in the eBadge Academy are going to try to claim, and we wish you luck. And if you want to know anything more about crisis intervention and prevention or anything, there's our information. You can contact us directly. Please go to our website and check out all the stuff we have to offer on the website. You can learn about our eBadges, but you can also learn about a lot of other stuff. So until next time, I'm John Raphael,
I'm Dan Hermerick.
and we will see you. Thank you.